Righty. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of This Week in Drones every Thursday, live, coming to you live from all over the country, 1 p.m. Eastern. I did want to say, if you want to subscribe and actually get updates every week and have it on your calendar, instead of just waiting for us to post it on LinkedIn, which sometimes happens bright and early, and sometimes it's, right before the show. Go to thisweekindrones.com and put in your info, and you'll get added to the recurring email, recurring invite that is on your calendar. So with that, we had a wonderful time this week at DroneResponders. Shout out to Charles Werner and the DroneResponders team. It's an amazing event. If you've never been, you might end up on the wait list if you try to get in for next year at this point. But it's just smaller size, still hundreds of people, and it's all the right people for drone as first responder, law enforcement agencies, technology companies, consultants, you name it, all getting together to further the drone programs, at law enforcement agencies. It's an amazing time. We see a lot of friends in the industry, and also a lot of new people that are just getting into it. So most of us were there, if not in person. Some of our teams were there this whole week. So the theme today is debriefing after the event from some of the conversations that were brought up on stage by various speakers. And also some of us, like myself, were standing behind a booth and talking to end users and talking to other technology companies, and a lot of really interesting things emerged throughout. So wanted to give space today for each one of us to bring up one of the main topics that stood out to us. And as Michelle always challenges us to not just kind of open these loops that are challenges and issues, but also to close some of them, to actually walk down the path and start to look at well, how do we actually solve this? Let's talk about that for a few minutes, instead of just kind of bring it up at the tail end of the session and then leave it open-ended and then maybe, never get to it. So I wanted to give a little space to actually close some loops. I'm sure we'll open a few more as we close one. We'll open 2 or 3 others. But with that said, let's do just like quick introductions and briefly at things. Already people are sending in comments. Thanks everybody. Christopher, good to see you. Richard, good to see you. I will focus a little bit more than I have been lately on the comments, on the actual written comments. So if you guys want to engage and ask a question, throw a comment in, I'm going to be diligent today to really pull those up as you guys send them in, in between comments. So stay engaged. Thanks everyone for participating. So with that said, I'll share, then Brandon, then Matt, then Jason, then Michelle, if you guys want to do. That's the order I see it in my screen. So yeah, David Lewin, your host of This Week in Drones, and also with Echodyne radars, and that was the booth I was standing behind this week. So my voice is probably a little hoarse from all the conversations about radars. So with that, Brandon.
Thanks, David. Elder Brandon Youngblood, former FAA, and now the founder of Drone Security Services.
Awesome.
Matt Sloane. I'm the co-founder of Skyfire AI and aspiring student astronaut.
Yeah, happy afternoon, everybody. Jason Day, Director of Unmanned Aircraft for Texas Department of Public Safety. And the reason my camera's off is because I'm sitting in the rental car getting ready to head to the airport to leave Virginia after the DroneResponders conference.
And I am Michelle Duquette at 3 Mad Air.
Wonderful. All right. Hey, short and sweet. Thanks. We're ready to get into the topics. All right. So teeing it up, I'd asked Michelle to bring up one of the big things that she, big takeaways. One of the sessions that she was in and Jason Day was presenting. And I won't even say too much about it. I'll just let you take it away, Michelle. And actually, however you want to roll it, if you want to bring up some of your notes, I wanted people out there to get in, to kind of get in your head and see how you think and see the logic of it, and kind of banter a little bit between you and Jason and the viewers out there to see what we can do about a common operating picture for drone as first responder. Go for it, Michelle.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I can start off by saying that this was an excellent conference for me. So in my previous world at MITRE, I didn't have the opportunity to really dig in to this community. Now in my new me, it's becoming very clear to me that this sector of our drone community has the most urgent need for help. So I've made a choice that I'm going to learn as much as I can to see how I might be able to help. And so as I was sitting listening to the various presentations, as I do, there were a lot of seams that were starting to present themselves to me as I was listening to, either the FAA talking about waivers or the myriad of experiences that our DFR programs were either successfully or maybe there were some challenges, but that they were experiencing, and it was all real life stuff. And I started thinking about how I might be able to get after some of these challenges, some of these seams that, while the people that were presenting would make it's like a periphery reference because it wasn't like their main focus, it was still a snag in that seam, and somebody's got to get after those. So I happened to be in one of the front rows as Jason was up on stage, one of the numerous times he was up on stage. And I just started doodling kind of what I thought I heard him say. And Jason, I don't know if you want to kind of set the context for your presentation, and then maybe I can just kind of go into when this is how I heard it.
Yeah, that's a perfect, I think, way to do this. So a little bit of background. In December of every year, DPS, we host a drone expo and TAC workshop.
Oh. Did we lose Jason's audio? Can anyone else hear him?
During that expo, did you lose me?
You came back, Jason. Go for it. During that expo.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So during our expo, Mike O'Shea was on a DroneResponders podcast, and he pulled me in the room, and we're talking about TAC because he's able to sit and listen to about all the things that we're doing with TAC. And he really kind of lit a fire under this and talked to Charles about having this TAC presentation. So on stage was myself and Corey Foy with Flight Tactics, and DPS started using TAC, Team Awareness Kit, about 2 years ago. We started really slow using the FBI server, but then we started hosting a statewide TAC server for the entire state of Texas. And if you're not familiar with TAC, it's just a very mobile-friendly dots on a map technology that allows you to visualize pretty much any data source you want, whether it be vehicles, people, helicopters, drones, any of those things. And it's been very successful. We now have 50 different agencies on our TAC server. We're federated with the National Guard, with Border Patrol, with the FBI, all these different entities. But what was really powerful for me, and I will, everybody on here has been a presenter at some type of event in the past. We can all sit on stage all day long and talk about these things because we're subject matter experts and we've done these panels and these discussions before. But you always talk to people afterwards and you get a sense of, how it was received. But what Michelle did and the way that she visualized what we were talking about was fantastic, because it meant that the information we were putting out there was actually received in a coherent way and people understood what we were talking about. So I'd like to turn it back over to Michelle and have her kind of show what all that turned into.
Okay. So I hope you all can see my screen. Is it big enough?
Yeah. I think last time you were able to scroll just slightly bigger. Let's see. Yep, there we go. Ooh, that looks amazing.
Okay, so as Jason was talking about using the tactical or team awareness kit, my brain started bleeding over into UTM and the situational awareness needs. And as he kept talking, there seemed to be a seam between the public safety mission that he was talking about that included all different kinds of missions. And there is someone in chat who is asking us about creating a drone force to include police, first responders, fire departments, etc. That is exactly what he was talking about on the stage, is how are we helping our first responders with their drone assets? How do we manage the ability to leverage these assets across one another? How do we get that common situational awareness? He was giving examples of how they've been doing it and the successes that they've been having. And so I started to just kind of draw out what I think in infrastructure, what I was hearing and what I know about infrastructure needs, which is not a lot. I'm not an infrastructure person. So what you see in this graphic is basically what Jason was talking about on the right-hand side. In previous discussions he and I have had, he has been kind of floating a concept about drones as a service for public safety, where there is an opportunity to take advantage of the downtime where the drone in a box is in the box, and perhaps one of the other agencies, I don't even know what to call them, offices, whatever. Maybe if it's a police drone in a box, maybe the fire department can use it, or vice versa. But there's all kinds of response scenarios where these drones could be providing similar services for each other. So I started drawing out what I thought this might need to look like, just in a rough schematic. And so what you see on the right side is kind of how I was envisioning all the missions that a drone as a service for public safety could serve. And it would be all under the auspices of a common operating picture of TAC, because they're already using it. They also use TAC for deconfliction. Is that correct, Jason?
Yeah, that's really one of the powers of TAC, is that it is software and hardware agnostic. It can ingest really any data source that you want. So on the drone side, you can almost conceptualize it as a public safety UTM ecosystem. So for us in Texas, we have all of the public safety drones show up in TAC. All of our public safety aircraft and ADS-B equipped aircraft show up in TAC. We have drone detection from multiple sensors across the state in TAC. We're about to be working with Pierce Aerospace and have remote ID in TAC. So now, whether it be on your phone or on a Windows-based machine, you have this whole airspace awareness platform that can ingest all of this data and keep the NAS safe, but more importantly, have your missions be more efficient, right? How many times have we shown up as a state agency to a scene and there's already a drone team from either fire or LE or EMS in the air, but because they're not on the same software platform or they haven't notified us, we don't know. But now with TAC, we can immediately see all of those different aviation assets that are in the air, then build out a deconfliction plan to work efficiently with those other agencies. Again, it helps you become and use UAS as a force multiplier.
So what I loved about this was I could have just substituted a couple words and it was UTM, with multiple service suppliers providing their services within a single ecosystem. And while the two are very separate, there is a need for some intelligence exchange between the two, but not necessarily all in, right? So you'll see a little firewall column there in the middle that's meant to represent that there is going to be a lot of activity going on within TAC, coordination, communications, that is inappropriate to be shared with the public. That stays within that environment. However, there does need to be some information that flows over to UTM. For example, there could be a polygon that pops up within that environment that is, a no-fly zone or something, or make some reference to public safety event, no-fly zone, whatever it is. I don't know. I think that I was talking with Amit and Brent from ANRA, and they have a capability. I mean, they're already connected with TAC, so they absolutely understand what I'm talking about as I walk through, what's in my head. They have an ability to put some kind of polygon or some alert up in their software. So I think the pieces are there. It's more about us figuring out how we want to present the intelligence. It's not that send me your data. We've got to stop with that kind of conversation. It's more about what intelligence is necessary for each of these users. And then what information makes up that intelligence. And then what data makes up that information. So
I think the other really important part in all of that is this is already in place and is being used by hundreds of agencies in Texas and Colorado and other parts of the country. And we all know the federal government is really slow, right? NASA and the FAA are making great strides in UTM, but it should already be implemented. And so we can now go to them and say, this is how it's already working. These are the things that we figured out on the security side, on the onboarding side, and show them that it can happen and help speed along the process, because UTM is needed now, not 5 years from now.
Yeah, agreed. David, there's a comment. And I apologize I can't see who writes what in the comments. All I see is LinkedIn user. There's one in here making a reference to latency and TAC. So Jason, can you speak to the operational latency within TAC?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest superpowers that TAC has, is if you are just using it for dots on a map, it is extremely low latency. It's very low bandwidth as far as the data pushes. It works really well with mesh networks. There's a lot of plugins for whether it be Go antenna all the way up to the expensive MPU5 radios and everything in between. And then as long as just one TAC user has a path back to your big pipe, the internet via Starlink or whatever, all of that information from all those other users is then combined. We even push TAC data from the ground to helicopters over cellular because it's not data intensive. Now, if you're using it to also watch drones or other video feeds, then you need a more robust connection. But if you're using it for simple situational awareness, know everything that's in the air, everything that's on the ground, it uses up very little data, which inherently makes it very low latency.
So let me just unpack that just a bit more. So for situational awareness, so that the humans are making the deconfliction decisions?
You want to say that again or reword that?
So what I think I just heard Jason say is that it's dots on a map, so it's low load. It's really good for situational awareness. And my question is, does that infer that with that situational awareness intelligence, it's the humans that are making the deconfliction decisions?
Versus maybe it being more automated?
Yes.
So is it a view only stream of all the data coming in, or are there options to actually add additional intelligence and make correlations between different data points? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm just asking him
Yes.
if there is a deconfliction automation within TAC.
Okay. Oh, Jason, did you say yes? Oh,
Did we lose him?
we might have a little latency there. By the way, that was Zev Nadler asking a question.
Are you there, Jason? Okay. So when he comes back, the way this works out in my head is that UTM is strategic deconfliction. Now, mind you, I say that a little bit tongue in cheek because I come from Legacy Airlines, and strategic deconfliction is, even in the most tactical sense, like an hour. and UTM is like, seconds to minutes. But nonetheless, it is focusing on strategic deconfliction. And TAC, in my head, again, this is all world according to Michelle, for whatever that's worth. TAC is in the moment. It's very much real time, in the moment, what you see out there. And then if there is deconfliction automation, Jason is going to have to speak to that. But in my mind, there is somebody, there's an air boss or someone who is watching all of this, looking at that TAC screen and making sure that they are coordinating with all the dots, all the agencies that have a dot on that map. They're coordinating with all of them so that everybody has SA on where everybody else is.
Yeah, so I'm back. Sorry, we entered an area that had bad cellular. That's exactly how it works. But TAC can be all of the different things we've talked about here, right? When we do hurricane response in Texas, in our joint air-ground coordination team, there is one person or two people that are on shifts that are just running TAC on a Windows PC for that airspace deconfliction plan and to make sure we don't run plastic in the metal. But there's also somebody running the tactical ops and deployment. So TAC allows you not only to be able to visualize all the dots on a map, but then you can place markers and information and draw polygons and search areas, and that pushes out to everybody's screen in real time. So it overall reduces the amount of radio communication that needs to go on, because you can just send a drone team a marker and then put on there, hey, go search this area or go do an inspection of this bridge. And then you can watch that team in real time. You see them get in the car. You see their dot moving at a certain speed, so you know they're in the car. You see that dot stop. You then see the drone pop up on TAC, and then you're able to pull up the live video of that drone. And you never had to have any more communication than go this bridge and do an inspection. But you know everything that team is doing. Right. And that guy who's now doing airspace deconfliction also sees that. And if there's a helicopter entering that AOR, he can then communicate that to both the helicopter crew and the UAS crew and make sure we are keeping the airspace safe.
So this is all exactly how I relate to an emergency situation. All of that communication is critical. So what I don't want people to misunderstand is that I'm not inferring that this is a UTM replacement. I'm saying that there is a model here for real-time information sharing, for real-time situational awareness and coordination that would be probably good to consider in addition to, as a supplement to the strategic deconfliction that we currently know as UTM. And then getting back to this drawing, there's like a box around this. And I called it a data mesh network because I think of all of these things in my head as nodes. And all of these nodes are feeding, they're feeding this mesh network. But at the bottom, there's this pipe that comes out. And I apologize, I'm not an artist. And this is a doodle, let's be clear. But this pipe that comes out is a way to acknowledge the fact that everything that is going on in that moment, in that emergency, with an understanding of what's happening in the commercial environment in the vicinity, is important to other people like Army Corps of Engineers, Highway Department, energy folks, Parks and Recreation, obviously the FAA, local law enforcement, the Water Department, anybody. These are all seams in my mind. Anybody that would have some kind of either I need to be cognizant of this happening and these were the effects to my world, or perhaps they have a post-event action. In any case, there needs to be a flow out that's part of all of this that gets that intelligence to them in a meaningful way. So that
Yeah,
was
what you said there is really powerful too, because you also have to understand that TAC allows you to easily share, even though, let's say we're on the Texas server, I can then send FEMA a link. It takes them to our TAC manager with already existing federal, state, local SSOs, single sign on. They can now join our TAC server and have all of this information in real time without having to generate credentials, come up with usernames, all of those things. It's instantaneous. So when we go to an event and we are deploying TAC for some type of disaster response, there's just a bunch of pieces of paper with a QR code. You scan your phone, within 2 minutes, you're in the system and you're now seeing and sharing all of this information. Very powerful, very quick.
If I may, one of the things I'd like to kind of put into context for those listening is a really specific scenario in which TAC is useful. And this is modeling the scenario that we use TAC deployed in the Middle East, but it's very, very, very relevant here in the United States, and that's wildfire fighting. And because you have such a mixture of ground components, air components, and a lot of these things moving in this piece of airspace, it's very dangerous flying. It's a very dangerous situation with weather and a lot of these variables that have to ebb and flow and impact. And that knowledge and that data, a piece of where people are and what they're doing is critical so that we don't accidentally kill somebody that, is trying to just do their job and wildfire. The other reason why it's very useful in that niche situation is because the airspace, obviously there's folks that violate the airspace, but that airspace is closed off through a TFR 137. And so when you have the ability to control that airspace, you can look on one screen, see where all the dots are, not only your air movement, right, but also your ground personnel, so you can direct that air movement, deconflict your UAS, and all these other moving pieces. I actually spoke to the NASA rep who was working on wildfire technology, and they still have a physical human flying in the sky, directing everything visually and not on some type of data source that they can use. We are well beyond that from a technology standpoint, where that all of those moving pieces and parts and the aircraft and the personnel should be displayed on this airboss's screen. And they can direct all that from the ground, removing another aircraft, removing another person that doesn't need to be putting themselves at risk, and doing all of this together. And then you can put that TAC on the ground personnel as well to give them increased situation. And then you can also visually display weather movements, wind, all of these things to keep people potentially alive. There was a movie that came out about the ground firefighters, I forgot what they're called. Actually, my nephew is one. And the smoke jumpers, and the wind shifted and it killed an entire team. If they had some type of asset to see, hey, the winds are shifting, other than some kind of rudimentary analog communication, that could have potentially saved their lives. So I personally have used TAC for many years in military situations, but the application in emergency situations is absolutely phenomenal. And Michelle and Jason, this has been a great conversation. So
absolutely, and honestly, and I'm gonna pull it up so people can see our faces for a second.
Zev, you make me laugh.
Oh yes, I needed to bring up his comment really quick. He says Michelle's doodles are like as amazing as a service I pay good money for to make presentations that look like a doodle and still don't look that good. Thanks, Zev.
That is no doubt. And she was doing that in real time. When she showed me that, I was like, everybody come look at this. And I had her later that night pulling out her device and just showing how awesome that doodle was.
See, AI is not taking all of our jobs. We still need hand drones.
We need people like Michelle, so
Right, exactly.
Look, cartoons. That's the way to go.
Maybe we transition, but keep in the same context, because one of the next topics is technology regarding, I'm thinking, well, what kind of technology was represented at this conference? What kind of technology is being used for DFR? And, ultimately, does it integrate with a common operating picture like TAC or others? I mean, and so one of that's kind of the big topic I wanted to hit was technology, how it works, how it doesn't work. Does it work for DFR? But to kind of keep it in the TAC framework, do you guys think that you could still use, one of my questions, can you still use, say, a proprietary software that works great, that's really, fancy, has a lot of features, it looks really cool, 3D, everything you want on a screen, but still push that to TAC and then make it part of a bigger operational picture? Is it all or
Hey,
none?
David, real quick before you jump to that topic, I'm gonna say everybody have a great afternoon. I gotta jump off here, but hit me up on LinkedIn if you need any more information. I'll put you in contact with our TAC team and Texas DPS, the state of Texas. We are always here to help anybody that needs it. Y'all have a great day. Thank you.
Safe travels, Jason.
Really appreciate it. All right, awesome. Yeah. So I mean, does
we can talk about him now.
Now we can talk about Jason. I just wish we would have seen his cowboy hat on this call, but we guys all missed out. But he tried showing it, but his windows were too dim. You couldn't really see. It looked like his head was chopped off right before it. But so I'm curious. Like a lot of us salespeople out there, we're selling our technology. It has its own features and its own capabilities, and a lot of it's visual based, like for example, if it's like a 3-dimensional view of the separation between an aircraft, manned aircraft, and a drone, and you can actually see because you have a system that's showing you elevation and you can see the difference on a visual. But like, I'm wondering if TAC can show all of that for, or like if an end user could still use the feature-rich proprietary software, but also push some of that important data, the relevant data, to TAC. That way, sort of everyone's using TAC as a single source of truth, but then can they still individually get the features of proprietary software? I'm curious.
So I think they do to an extent, and this was kind of where I'm not knowledgeable enough yet. So maybe Zev, you're out there. Maybe you can help me think through this a little bit better later. But being it's agnostic, you can plug any system in, it can accept any data feed. Whether or not you can manipulate the functions of those other systems, I don't really know to what extent. However, I do think that there's goodness in this discussion that we're having about USS's UAS service suppliers in the commercial UTM environment being able to push data over to TAC through that pipe, so that you can have a more robust set of intelligence as needed.
So I'll talk about this from the Air Force Research Lab perspective. When I was working UCS, which was UAS Common Software, there was an attempt to standardize certain things, and so there's actually NATO standards, specifically STANAG 4586, which is an output of standard messaging protocol for something just happened.
All right, I pulled you up to the top. I figured people were watching on their phone.
I get uncomfortable when it's just me. No, so STANAG 4586. So it was a messaging protocol for camera functions and controls, where you could do this very basic input, get this very basic output, because when you're moving a camera around, it's pretty simple: up, down, left, right, whatever, zoom in, zoom out, right? As the technology progressed and advanced, and more features came online, that became a little bit more difficult. But to the point on TAC is a common operating picture. It's an image, right? So your basic output protocols is location through some means, through some standardized means. So geo, lat, longs, right? You have, for aircraft, it's heading, speed, altitude are the main critical points. And so as long as you're pushing out that data, you can protect all the proprietary stuff on the other side to do all of the whatever back-end calculations and whatever. It's the same, David, I'm sure, with Echodyne radar, is it gets in a return, right? A radar return. There's a lot of back-end software manipulation of that data to do certain things with it. And then it does that calculations, and then it pushes an output. That output is, again, location, distance, and all of the things that, from an operator's perspective, they need, not what all that back-end communication
Almost like
is.
you need like clean data that's already validated.
Yeah.
Be sent, so like the radar could have filtering on it to get rid of some of the things you don't want to see. And then
And
only,
that's,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, and that's important for data size, right? It keeps the data down into the kilobyte range because all you're just pushing like one liner of geo lat longs and stuff, and then it also protects latency because that data element is so small. It's smaller, so it can push it faster, and so that's what's critically important.
So what I'm writing down here, guys, is a question: can TAC accommodate other services functions without compromising the integrity and performance of the SA that makes TAC so valuable? That's a question that I don't have an answer to.
Yeah, and I think pushing information out from TAC to proprietary set systems is going to be a lot more difficult. Matt, you may be a lot more qualified to answer something like that. I can speak to it at a high level, but not deeper.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of in the same boat. I mean, I think I don't know enough about it from a technology standpoint, but I will say that I think one of the things that we've seen is when you start pushing things back and forth to platforms, that's when stuff gets lost in the shuffle, or it displays wonky or whatever. And so we've run into this quite a bit. But yeah, I mean, I think TAC is the sort of I don't mean this in a bad way, but is the lowest common denominator as far as what platform most people have access to. The question is, how do you make sure that everybody's on the right sort of version and that kind of thing. So it's not it's more Android than it is Apple. It's harder to use, it's harder to customize, and each agency does it a little bit differently.
So actually, I think Zev Nadler felt the hair standing up on the back of his neck when we said his name, and he just magically popped on screen. So I don't know if you have a second, Zev, behind your bookshelf. I think he's reading or something right now.
I'm hiding behind it. Yeah.
You're our resident TAC expert, and this conversation became wholeheartedly about TAC. I figured I'd love to hear from you. I think you had a couple comments. If you want to join the conversation and make a few comments.
Yes, I just want to do a mic test. You can hear me, right?
You sound great.
Okay, great. Just bought a new boom mic because my last live stream, which by the way is called All Things TAC, I had Jason and his entire team on, and my mic went wonky, and I'm never going to ever let that happen again. So I went out and invested in a good boom mic. So anyway, the first thing I wanted to mention is Brandon talked about the folks, unfortunately, that were killed during a fire. And I think he was speaking about the Granite Mountain hotshots at the Yarnell fire just in my backyard here in Arizona. And interestingly enough, that incident is what drove AJ Johansson and Dave Zader, two very, very familiar names in the firefighting TAC community, to bring TAC into the firefighting world, because had those 19 souls had TAC with them, their analog radios, which you had mentioned, wouldn't have mattered, and the airplanes overhead wouldn't have need to see them through the smoke. They would know exactly where they were from the points showing up on the TAC map. So yeah, that was it was the hot shots from Granite Mountain. Horrible situation. They actually did a movie on that that you mentioned. That would be good to see. The other thing I wanted to address was how much control each individual has with TAC. So that's actually, I do fractional business development, and one of my clients now is Fox 2 Sierra, and they're a company that does TAC integrations. And so what that looks like is, for instance, one of our clients has a munition drop release that they not only wanted to know what was going on with the drone that was actuating that release, but they wanted to know each individual step within the release of that munition. Was a pin pulled, and all these things now are integrated with TAC, so all the operators individually can see that. So it can integrate with most anything, whether it's an EO device, whether it's an IR device, whether it's a radar device. It can integrate with just about everything, and that's the beauty of it. And there are APKs out there that are used, and it happens pretty easily. The other thing I wanted to address was, can anybody who's on the TAC system or on your TAC server actually use every one of these pieces of hardware that are out there? So the answer is to a certain extent. So the TAC plugin, which are the ones that are already made by somebody and not like a custom software like we do, but a plugin that is available. And by the way, TAC itself is open source. So the plugin is called UAS Tools, and that can allow a user to actually move the gimbal so that they can point the camera where they want to point it. So they can actually take control of that. There are also ways to take control of the actual bird. But it is limited. And, like Matt said, it is the common denominator, but that's what's great about it. It's the lowest common denominator, so everybody can kind of join in and be a part of it. So if you want to watch more about what Texas DPS does with TAC, you can go out to my profile and you'll see the last one of the last posts was the live stream from Texas DPS. And then if you go a couple back, you'll see Dave Zader and AJ talking about TAC with Fire. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If I know.
Yeah, absolutely. And then any final questions for Zev? And then let's transition to the other, because we got 2 more topics to hit in about 20 minutes. But Zev, thanks for jumping on. Or Michelle, does anyone have anything quick for Zev?
Thank you, Zev.
All right. Thank you. Take care, y'all.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Bye.
Sweet. All righty. So we've got 19 minutes left and counting. 2 more topics, and I really want to give both Brandon and Matt space to kind of share and go down these 2 paths, right? And one is technology, and the other is more about the legal aspects, working within the regulations. And that's more Brandon, and I'll pass it to you, Brandon. And then kind of 2 parts: regulations, and secondly, building an aviation department, not just having individual officers trained or with their Part 107 license in flying drones, but actually making it into a little bit more of a coherent, program, right? And so, take it away. You got good 7-8 solid minutes.
Yeah, no, I'll try to do it less than that, because we've hit on this topic many times. So Michelle, thank you, inspired me to really look at the regulatory area. Well, I mean, not look at it. It's been deep in it for many years. But how do we bring this regulatory knowledge and insight now that some of us are out of the FAA to the folks that need it the most, that are really putting in the drones to good use to save lives, right? Keep people alive. And that's something that's very, some of us are very passionate about. And so, leverage the technology for good things, even though most of my business and everything that I'm trying to do is trying to keep people safe from people using drones for the bad things. So the piece with the regulations is really 2 options. You can fly Part 107 or fly under public aircraft operation under Part 91, and that's about it. Those are your 2 paths. And so one of the things that is a misnomer is a lot of the OEMs out there are pushing, some of them anyways, and not all of them, are pushing this Part 107 route because that's really all they know. Part 107 was not designed for this type of operation. It is not. It is meant for a single individual doing a commercial purpose with that single drone or drones or whatever. So that one person is licensed to do this job and go out and do whatever their means are. That doesn't fit the model of what a public safety organization is, because it is an organization. And so the benefit of being a public safety organization or law enforcement agency or whatever it is decades ago, Congress and the FAA recognized that those organizations wanted to develop their own aviation programs, similar to kind of like what the military runs. And so public aircraft operations was developed, and it's codified in law. And it essentially gives the public organization the ability to self-certify training, so they can create their own training programs, and self-certify airworthiness so that they can maintain their own aircraft. And so there's a liability shift with the training and the airworthiness aspect of that to the public operator, rather than saying the FAA is responsible for the airworthiness of that aircraft. So long story short, trying to get to a long story short anyways, a lot of the folks that are standing up these DFR programs, they are not aviation oriented folks. And so to dive in and route through these regulations is tricky, because it's a very new thing. And so Michelle hit the nail on the head a couple months ago, and I heard this, and I'm like, let's create a program. Let's pull some of our former colleagues, our colleagues today that left the FAA, that are used to review these safety packages, and let's build a training program specifically for public safety. And we did. And so we're actually kicking off this Drone as a First Responder or public safety training program specific to public aircraft operations and getting beyond visual line of sight waivers through 91-113, which is the Part 91 realm that this would fit in. And also how to create and maintain an aviation program centered on drone usage. So the basic concept is, you give a man a fish, they eat for a day. You teach a man to fish, they can feed themselves for a lifetime. So what we're doing is we're trying to teach the public organizations to understand how to speak the aviation language and to run a public aircraft operation in perpetuity within their organization. And so Michelle is thankfully, reviewing a lot of our material that we created up to this point thus far. We're going to have an audit course. We've invited several law enforcement agencies who already have established DFR programs to audit the course, make sure we're on the right track. And we will putting out announcement, hopefully this week, possibly early next week, of a beta course that we're going to offer in I believe the second week of May. And then we'll kick off the full program, and it'll be quarterly over an 18-month period. And so I'm really hoping and pushing hard that Michelle will be the primary instructor of this course when we finally get it off the ground and running. And it will all be taught by former FAA people who you can, drill them on all the FAA things that you want to know about. But it'll be a day-and-a-half course. It's going to be, I hope, a really helpful thing to get organizations to develop an aviation program and be able to sustain themselves, at least on the regulatory side, while Matt and some of his great folks are working on the technology piece to bring them the technology they need to execute this. So again, the the PAO Part 91 place is the place to live for public aircraft, and I think this is going to be fantastic. And Michelle, I really love to hear your input on any of this, because you are such a critical component to us doing this.
Well, I want to make a distinction between what this is and what many others are doing when we say DFR training or public safety training. A majority of the training out there is, how do you use this drone? How do you use it safely, right? What does the technology look like? How does it react? What do you do when it does X, Y, or Z? That's not what this is. This course is teaching how to be aviation. It's how to sustain that mindset going forward. We all know that, and I'll say we, because I've been a part of this, we have shoved aviation down everybody's collective throat. Everybody that uses drones, we have forced them to become aviators. And it's a lot. And I've said this a number of times, and I'll say it again. It is a lot for people who already have a very all-consuming mission that they focus on day in, day out. So what I'm hoping this course is able to do is take some of that burden off, so that there is a structure and a practice that they can organically take in, and it becomes part of their DNA, rather than this force feeding, this extra thing we have to do. So I don't want folks that are out there that have public safety training for drones to get sideways on this. This is a compliment. It supplements what you're already doing. It gives them that back-end business structure for an aviation program. It's not going to be doing this is how you use your drone in a police chase or whatever, the technical aspects of public safety training. I just wanted to make that clear.
And I think one of the an analogy that our partners, so and just real quick, so Kobeck Consulting is a strategic partner of Michelle and I's, and they are the ones that we're working with to put this all together. And so, one of the analogies that they use is, police officers don't have Colt, they don't have Smith & Wesson, or any of the gun vendors come in and teach them how to shoot a gun. They have their own staff who are trained marksmen and everything else to know the regulations and everything else to teach them how to effectively use their firearms. This is the same thing. We need to teach them so that they can teach themselves internally, and again, have a program in perpetuity that they can rely on themselves to be able to continue to operate their drone within that regulation space. And so they should not have to rely on, and I apologize if there are any vendors on here, they should not have to rely on these OEM vendors to continually support their regulatory activity. They need that in-house so that they can, be self-sufficient and move and become the aviators that we need them to be to operate in the NAS.
I mean, if we're going to call a drone an aircraft, you might as well teach them how to make an aviation department if they're flying an aircraft. If they're flying, Go ahead, Matt. and then Matt, maybe you can pick up, because you got about 5-6 minutes to talk technology, and reach out to Brandon Youngblood, everybody on LinkedIn, shoot him a note. I mean, at least at this point, if you want to follow up on that course. But yeah, Matt, go for it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with you guys. And, having been doing this now for 11 years with these agencies, they don't really understand what they're getting themselves into. I think I'll pat ourselves on the back, a minute here, is that, I think we've done a better job of most consulting companies or most, groups that are helping to get this technology into place, giving people the realistic view of what they're getting themselves into. But I mean, the honest to God truth is that things change on a weekly basis. And, I think there's a lot of new regulations. I think there's a lot, and actually I take that back. There are not a lot of new regulations. There are a lot of new interpretations of regulations. And frankly, you guys are going to, laugh when I say this, but like, it depends a little bit on what side of the bed the guy at the FAA that you're talking to woke up on that morning as to how they interpret these rules. And especially as this stuff gets disseminated down to the regions, it's open to even more and more interpretation. And unless somebody flags that there's something untoward going on, which is something Charles Werner is great at doing, then it just kind of happens like that. And so, I said, I contrast what you guys are doing with the OEMs, as you mentioned, and I'm not personally trying to offend any of the OEMs, but the term smoke and mirrors gets thrown around a lot these last couple months, especially in the DFR space, as we've gotten, these massive companies that are trying to, sell DFR in a like a assembly line style. I think that unfortunately, to some degree, and this is not a blanket statement, but to some degree, if you've seen one regulatory approval, you've seen one regulatory approval. If you've seen one DFR program, you've seen one DFR program, because each one is a little bit different. And I think, the agencies are in some ways being done a disservice in that, they go to their trusted vendor, and the trusted vendor tells them what the trusted vendor wants them to hear. Because that's the technology that they have built, or that's the way that they think it should be done. That's what they've structured their whole thing around. And so back to your Part 107 versus COA, I mean, that was one of the first marketing documents we made 11 years ago. 107 wasn't out yet. So whenever 107 came out, that was one of the documents we made back then, was how do you know the difference? Why pick one versus the other? And everybody that was telling you, oh, just go 107, it's absolutely the right way to go, or the people that didn't understand how to write COAs, right? Because they're like, it's just easier, just go that route. And look, there is an argument for 107 as a certification versus 107 as an operating framework. By all means, it's a worthwhile certification. I'm not saying that, but I guess the point, to sum up the point in 3 minutes or less, is that it's a nuanced conversation, and you need to really talk to somebody who's an expert about it. And that's what, well, David, not so much on the COA versus 107 thing, but the rest of the three of us on here have a lot to say about that issue. And I think it definitely requires a lot of conversation to pick the right framework that's right for you.
Why does it matter, Matt, in real terms? Like, give me an example of an agency that just went the Part 107 route and got stuck because they didn't do the COA route. What do they bump? What's the ceiling they bump against per se?
Well, here is the rub, right? Which is that none of this has ever gone to court. And so we don't know, is the honest answer. I think that people who understand the nuances of the rules understand that getting a department level certification and putting the liability on the department makes the most sense from a liability standpoint. But there are a lot of people, a lot of agencies out there that are just using 107. And, it hasn't really been put to the test to a huge extent. And it's not to say that that's not the right way to do it. I mean, I think this is from an idealistic perspective, it's not the right way to do it. But there are also plenty of agencies who are out there flying with no COA or 107. So, I mean, look, it's to everybody's points earlier in the conversation. I mean, airspace deconfliction is probably one of the most important things that we are faced with, both from a technology and from an application standpoint, because most of the people out there flying drones don't have either one of these certifications, and we've got to figure out where the risks are and where the threats are. And we're trying to fly drones beyond line of sight, further and further and further from the takeoff point, using things like the radars that you guys make. But the reason that this is why we can't have nice things, right? Because not everybody wants to follow the rules. So
I want to add one thing too on the Part 107-91 distinction. And Part 107, and I mentioned this, is that it's dependent on a single person. Right. So let's say you have 3 folks on your team, right? And there's a police department that I just spoke to that they do, and they all have their Part 107 licenses. What happens when that person leaves? And they bring in a new person. Now you have to pay another X amount of dollars to get them trained up, get the course, and do all that stuff. But if you stay on the Part 91 land, it's your organization, right? So you can do all that training in-house. You can self-certify, do your proficiency, and do all that other stuff. So it's also an economical advantage long-term to have an aviation program that's dedicated under the PAO realm, that you don't have to continually pay for all of these certifications and these other things that you have to maintain. Oh, by the way, I believe Part 107 is only good for 2 years. So you have to retest again in 2 years. And a lot of that knowledge may come out because there's a lot, let's face it, a lot of the Part 107 test isn't really required for day-to-day operations. I don't need to know what a cumulonimbus cloud is when I'm flying my drone day-to-day, or the difference between, whatever. And so there's some nuances in there. So you're going to have to retrain. It helps when you're thinking long-term. You want an aviation program. You don't want individuals trained on drones. Yeah. There's a big difference. Go ahead.
No, you're absolutely. I was just going to agree with that point. I can't tell you the number of times that I went out and have done speaking engagements, and I say, all right, everybody who's got a drone, raise your hand. And, like 60% of the room raises their hand. And I'm like, all right, who's got a drone program? And like one guy in the back, there is a difference between going out to a big box retailer and buying a drone and having a drone program. And I think that's really, really critical. And, I think that's a lot of where all of this comes back to is, we can't do these next level operations and this next generation stuff until we get a handle on the current stuff. And purpose is like people.
We heard Tim Morrell at the DroneResponders conference make reference to the fact that he is not a fan of one-offs, and that's what we're talking about here. We need to get to something. And Chris, thank you for putting in comments about the word standards. It bothers me too. I don't even use it anymore. I talk about normalizing how we think. And if we can normalize how we think, it becomes organic, and we're all understanding one another and approaching things the same way. That's how I'm hoping this evolves. So we get away from the one-offs, we get more towards a programmatic approach, and everybody's thinking the same way.
Michelle, thank you. I know you had to run. And if Brandon, Matt, if you need to drop, or if you want to chat for 5 more minutes, we can keep, because people are making some good comments. But Michelle, thank you. I know you had something right up against the hour.
I do. Bye, everybody.
I'm Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
And so
David,
David,
hang on for a second. Yeah, and I wanted to make your comment, and then I wanted to bring up a comment from a viewer, someone.
Yeah. So I wanted just to real quickly hit on the liability perspective. Everybody has to remember, these are municipalities. They take on a tremendous amount of liability just in the nature of their work. And so they're not, these guys are not a risk aversion from taking on liability. So like you go LAX, they've got helicopters. Those are all part PAO operations. Those helicopters are not flying under, traditional like Part 61 and all that type of pilots. These are PAO operations, and they're very regularly doing that. The difference, the nuance is the price point of access. And so you have a lot smaller municipal police departments that are able to grab onto this because it's cheaper, but not versed in this type of language. And so we need to help them speak the language, understand the regulations that they need to fly under, which at the end of the day are not that complicated if you spell it out in a very simplistic way. If you talk to a lawyer, yeah, absolutely, they're going to run and you don't know what the hell they're talking about. But there are really, and that's what we're trying to do, is bring this down to the operational language level and say in a day and a half, this is all the stuff that you actually need to know. This is how you can build a program. And when you have a program, you also can develop lessons learned from, years of operating that program and the experiences that these police officers gain. They can hand that down, and that knowledge and that training and everything else that they develop. And this is why the military has a stellar aviation program, is because of all the lessons learned in the doctrine that they've been able to document and pass on to their pilots. And so that's what we're really trying to achieve with the course.
Actually, is there individual liability on the Part 107 licensed flyers at this point?
I mean, of course, if they don't comply, let's say, so a big nuance with Part 107 is you can't fly up over people unless you're in compliance with whatever that new regulation for operating over people was, with the impact
categories and stuff.
Yeah. Categories, yes. Part 91, you can operate over people, but obviously there's a liability issue to that. And so if you do inadvertently fly over people for whatever reason under Part 107 and you are not in compliance, like you don't have a parachute or whatever, these other things, you are liable, because you are at that point violating the regulation. Under Part 91, it's a bit different. It's not like that.
Because you want to avoid that. I mean, as a police officer, I'd probably want to avoid that personal liability, right? I mean, if there's
it's not. But the key point, it's not personal liability. The liability falls on the department because they are protected under, as a public function. They are not, you know what I'm saying?
No, he's saying protect you from the personal liability under doing it under Part 107.
Right.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Well, like, as an example, that someone, I think it was at DroneResponders, there was some story I heard about, cops, police officers that got in trouble for like continuing the police chase just outside of their jurisdiction, and there was some issues and some things that went on, and the liability fell on those officers because they were outside of the scope, and it just became this whole thing. I'm just kind of curious if that's true. Again, if you're like an individual Part 107 licensed person flying a drone on behalf of the, your law enforcement agency you work for, and it crashes and someone's hurt, is it 100% on you? Versus if it's the organization like Part 91, is it a little different? I mean, you can't negate personal life. You can't do something really, stupid with it, really reckless. You'd still be personally liable no matter what.
The truth of the matter is, no matter which framework you're operating on, if something bad happens and somebody gets hurt, they're going after everybody, right? But it's more about, I think the other thing too, particularly in public safety, and this is kind of we're in the weeds here a little bit, but as most people know, a lot of cops and firefighters have side businesses. One of the perks of getting your Part 107 certification paid for by work is you can then go and do duty, off-duty work. So a lot of, guys are shooting real estate stuff, or they're going out and doing, video production stuff with their Part 107. And if the FAA comes for your Part 107, personally, then that can affect your business as well as your standing at work. And so that's just another additional reason. But, I think that the key thing here, and now we're really in the weeds, and this will be part of Brandon's class, I'm sure. But the key differentiator here is that you actually have to prove to the FAA that you're a public agency to operate under Part 91 using what's called a public declaration letter. And what's been explained to me very clearly by the FAA is the whole purpose of that public declaration letter is so that you and your city attorney or county attorney actually understand that there is a transfer of liability from the FAA to that local agency by operating under that framework. And so that's the part that gets everybody a little bit spooked, is like, well, wait a minute, what does this actually mean? And I think that's the part of understanding, like, this is what a drone program looks like versus what a guy with a drone or gal with a drone looks like. And that's it.
Because you could help each city law enforcement agency could help their leadership to embrace that liability exchange, right? To take on more liability if they show them there's a holistic program that goes with it to protect the city by doing things correctly, right? And then it's like, well, if you follow the rules, why would you get in trouble? And here are the rules. And they go, well, we could follow those. Then, okay, let's take the benefit then of, saying we'll follow these rules, and now we get part.
Well, and that's why part of that is it allows you to make your own, right? To make your own training standard, to make your own, certification and checkoff procedures and stuff like that. So again, nothing wrong with getting a Part 107 also, right? I mean, it's a great way to say, okay, we've passed a test, we've gotten some type of certification, but also remember Part 107 doesn't have a practical component. It's just a written test. So you could literally have never touched a drone in your life and pass the Part 107 test. And that's a problem, right? So that's where, the COA self-certification part actually helps build more than that as a requirement. So
I want to pull up this from Alex Hamilton. He said, my agency has both 107 and 91. We're less than 1 nautical mile from AATL. Under Part 107, we need prior approval to launch for anything in the Bravo in the UASFM grids. Under Part 91, we can launch with no advance planning or permission during emergencies, etc., as long as we comply. So that was an example of a real world scenario of the difference, right?
And I can tell you, Fred, I mean, the reason why is purely from a black and white, the way the regulation's written. Under Part 107, you cannot fly in controlled airspace without a 107.41 authorization. Lance has sped that up, right? But under Part 91, there is no restriction to fly in controlled airspace so long as you can comply with the regulations that are within Part 91 for that airspace class. So if it's Class C airspace, so long as you can comply with that, you can fly in there all day long. There's no restriction. You don't need an authorization. And that's, again, these are some of the little nuances that unless you live within the regulations for any amount of time, you wouldn't be able to peel apart. And just buying a drone and diving into this stuff, what I've found is that a lot of these, unfortunately, and again, I'm not trying to speak bad about anybody, but the OEMs don't even know a lot of these really deep down into the weeds nuances of how that happens. And so I just think Part 91 is a little bit more upfront work. However, it's in the long term, it's more efficient to operate, and you will be safer in the long run under a PAO because you learn as you go and you get to teach that knowledge back end. I think Part 107 is the fast way to do it, but it's not, this is Brandon's opinion, the right way to do it.
Well, and you said it earlier, Matt, it's like if we do it right now and you build that foundation of the aviation program with all the paperwork and all the nuances Brandon's referring to, then we can use all this cool technology that you and I get our hands on, and maybe move towards, who knows, automated DAA using all these stacks of technology above, 200 feet and on, what the possibilities are. The capabilities really there, but the framework be built.
And a lot of that you can't do unless you're doing it under Part 91, right? So, I mean, a lot of the 99% of the BB-LOS waivers right now for public safety agencies are being done under Part 91. And you have to have a basic type of COA before you do the advanced type stuff. So, yeah, I mean, you're essentially setting yourself up for future success by doing a little bit more hard work up front, to Brandon's point.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I know we're over time, quite over time. This is a great conversation. Matt, do you want to say anything more about RISE? We could do it on another program. I mean, anytime, but I just figured if you want to mention, since we're talking about technology, testing technologies, what can technology do? What can it not do? What are you allowed to do? All that. But do you have any comments on what you guys are doing?
No, I appreciate you asking me about it. And so what you're talking about, and I think I mentioned it on one of the other webinars, but we have a facility here in Huntsville, Alabama, which, Alabama's home of Army Aviation and the FBI's bomb school and a bunch of other stuff here. Really great town if you haven't been to Huntsville. Just a little plug there for the city. But we're doing what we call the RISE DFR Village here. We have a 2,200 acre test site that we have access to. It's actually owned by Huntsville International Airport. So to Alex's earlier point and to Brandon's point as well, operating safely within the confines of airport property is possible. We have the ability to fly on all 2,200 of those acres, even though we're directly across the street from the airport. But the idea behind this place is that it's a testing ground for all of these different things. And so, it's, if you want to compare one drone to another drone to a third drone, you want to compare different softwares, different drones in a box, different types of radars. Those are all the things that we're some of them we already have, somewhere in the process of getting here at the DFR Village. It's actually supported by the manufacturers that have their stuff on site there. And so it's free for end users. So if public safety agencies want to come down, they want to see stuff, test stuff, fly stuff. It's a little hard to do that at trade shows, as we all know. But it's essentially a model home for DFR. You can come down and see all that and test it out. And we have, classrooms and facilities and things like that. So we're really excited about it. We just got started, finally kind of getting it built out. We had some real estate delays, and then of course it got our version of cold here in Alabama for a couple of weeks. So we're excited about getting it up and running, and we'll be starting to host events there, in the next month or two, and certainly we'll put that out there. But it's dfrvillage.com. Come check us out, and again, it's free. So come down here, and we'll set you up with a good time.
Come on, you can't beat free. Well, I feel like we got to do a This Week in Drones in-person event at one point. And, maybe a little mini certification from Brandon and Michelle. And,
come on down. We got good food here in Alabama. Good Southern hospitality.
All right. Well, thanks, guys, for your time. Thanks, everyone, for participating. We'll be here next week, same time, same place. So we'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks, everyone.